Marhaba. Who here speaks English? A very good morning, everybody, and very warm welcome to this, which is the events part of the 29th annual Abu Dhabi Book Fair, International Book Fair. How many of you were here for the first Abu Dhabi International Book Fair? I don't think you were, because it was 29 years ago, and it was held in a Bedouin tent, and it was attended by Sheikh Zayed himself. So we are in a very long tradition of promoting literature, the spoken word, communication, and the transmission of ideas, philosophy, thought, and intelligence through the written and spoken word. So let's bring it right up to date. How many of you here have got online and ever seen a TED Talk? So you know what TED Talks are. Well done. Because if you're here for the How to Get Published event, you're in the wrong event, and unfortunately I can't tell you where you need to go. But if you're here for the event that is How to Get Published, this is not it. This is about how to do a TED Talk. The art of communication, the art of persuasion is about selling a story by and large. And the gentleman that we have here to talk to you is the preeminent expert on communications in the business world, in the political world, and increasingly, one can hope, in the world of diplomacy. Carmine Gallo is an extraordinary communicator, a fantastic TED talker, and he advises some huge global brands on how to communicate with their shareholders, with their customers, with their market, and around the world. Would you please give an enormous welcome to Carmine Gallo? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Marhaba. Good morning. How are you? Everyone is good? Good. I see you come from some of the local schools. Good, wonderful. So today, in the next few minutes, I would like to talk to you about a skill that each and every one of you can build to stand out, to be more successful in your life, in any capacity, in any field that you choose. And that skill is communication, but more specifically, it's persuasion. Does anybody know what we mean by persuasion? Who can tell me what persuasion means? Persuasion. What is it? It is the art of talking, of communication. Close, close. Persuasion is the ability to combine your ideas and your words to convince me to take action. So if you can't convince me of something, then you just have a good idea. But if you can't convince me, you're not persuasive. The best part about everything I'm going to teach you this morning is that we already know how to do this. We know how to be good public speakers, how to be more persuasive. In fact, most of what I'm talking about today goes back more than 2,000 years. Aristotle was one of the Greek philosophers who wrote the first book on persuasion and public speaking. And in fact, in the history that I've read of the Arab Peninsula, poetry, storytelling, communication, this is where it began. So we are the best storytellers. You are people who already understand how best to do this, how best to be a great public speaker. Do you think public speaking is important for any of you in your careers? In what you do in life? Do you think public speaking is important? Why would it be important? Why? Why is it so important? Because as I wrote in this book, which is out here, I will sign this book for you when we're done. The ancient art of persuasion is no longer a soft skill. I come from California in the States, and I don't know about out here, but they refer to public speaking as a soft skill. It's not the sciences, they say. And yet what we're learning is that it's absolutely fundamental. The hard science behind public speaking shows that it is one of the most important fundamental skills that each and every one of you should develop and learn. Do you believe that public speaking is a skill that you can develop? Yes, you absolutely can. And you must, because that's what we call the human edge. The reason why I wrote 5 stars is because I noticed that a lot of people are good at what they do, they're average or they're good, but the difference, the few exceptional leaders and entrepreneurs and people who get their ideas across are those who can express themselves more confidently, who are better at public speaking. That's why we call it the human edge. Garry Kasparov won, or lost actually, a very famous chess match many years ago, 2 decades ago, to an IBM machine. And now we're even more afraid of machines, aren't we? Automation, artificial intelligence, what's going to happen to our careers and our jobs? And yet Garry Kasparov, after thinking about it for 20 years, and he was very upset when he lost to a machine, he said he came to a realization that there's only one thing that we can do that machines can't, and that's dream. So he encourages everyone to dream big. And he's right about that. What I have learned after researching my book and some of my other books is I have learned that the human edge is that one skill that you can build that no robot, no computer, nobody will be able, nothing will replace the ability to connect with another person through your verbal communication, through public speaking. And I've actually been told that by people who are scientists, who study artificial intelligence. And they told me, they said, Carmine, we can build a robot that can recognize human emotion, but we cannot build a robot that has human emotion. So the only way to connect with another person is through our ideas and our words. And that's why it's fundamental to today. Now, I believe that all great communicators, all great public speakers, let's focus on public speaking, who are persuasive, do 3 things. They're emotional, they're novel, and they're memorable. I'm just going to take you through a few of these elements that each and every one of you can build today. We're going to focus on emotion first, because that's one thing that completely separates us from any type of automation. Emotion. Passion is everything. You cannot be a great public speaker, whether you're in school or whether you're in your career. You cannot be a great public speaker unless you are enthusiastic and passionate about your topic. So you need to dig deep to identify, what is it that I'm passionate about? What gets me excited? Because when you're excited, your listener will be excited too. So how many of you know a little about the history of Apple and Steve Jobs? You heard a little bit about Steve Jobs, okay? I come from Silicon Valley. I don't live too far from Apple. And I wrote the first book on how Steve Jobs communicated. And he was an extraordinary communicator. And he really studied this stuff. It was part of the success of Apple. You never would have heard of Apple if Steve Jobs had not been an extraordinary communicator about the technology and the brand. One of the things that made him special, and he passed away several years ago, one of the things that made him special is he was really passionate about his topic, very passionate. And he shared that passion with other people. I want to show you a short video clip. Steve Jobs, in 1997. In 1997, the company that he was running was this close to losing money and going bankrupt. It was about to be wiped out. And Steve Jobs held an informal staff meeting, and he talked to his staff, and he wanted to get them excited about their technology. And here is an actual clip from that staff meeting. Can I show it to you?
Me, marketing's about values. This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. And we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us. Our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for. Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value, is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe.
People with passion can change the world for the better. That's what he believes. And that's why I always ask people, if you want to be a great public speaker, what is it that you're passionate about? And don't be afraid to share that, because passion is contagious. We like to hear people who are excited about what they do. Now, in the States and in other places around the world, they're actually studying how is it that some people connect with another person better than someone else. What do they do? Well, they're very passionate, but they do something else. They tell stories. And that's why I said it's very important for all of you to understand that this is the Arabian Peninsula is where storytelling began. You are the great storytellers of the world. And we are now finding that stories connect one another. In business, where I do most of my work, no one tells stories. I guess they forgot about that when they left school. They forgot to be good storytellers. And yet, there are outstanding individuals who are great storytellers. The great leaders of our time are good storytellers. In the lab, they're actually finding that stories affect our brains, that two people are connected when they hear each other tell stories. Not when they deliver information, but when they tell stories. Anthropologists who study history are finding that storytelling was a major milestone in human development, that it was through stories that the tribes got together, and they were stronger together through their stories. This is a fire pit on an island where a very rich man lives. His name is Richard Branson, who started Virgin Atlantic and the Virgin companies. Richard Branson gathers around his fire pit on his island and tells stories with his team. And he says the art of storytelling is very important. It can drive change. He believes that you cannot be successful today unless you are a great storyteller. Melinda Gates has been trying to lift people out of poverty around the world. She too believes in the power of storytelling. All of these successful people believe in storytelling. Sometimes I work at Google in California. At Google, they have people who are called chief storytellers. It is their ability to tell stories which makes them successful. Each and every one of you, when you begin your public speaking career, and I'm sure that in colleges today you have to do a lot of speaking. Is that correct? You have to do a lot of speaking in your classes? What about you? In your classes, do you do a lot of speaking? Are you learning to be better public speakers? There are 3 elements of story, 3 types of story that each and every one of you should be telling every time you do any kind of public speech. Stories about yourself are the most important. Those are called personal stories. If you tell stories about who you are and where you're from, that's how we connect with each other. Aristotle was very ahead of his time on this stuff. Aristotle believed that most of your conversation should be what he called pathos, which is emotion, story. A lesser part should be information, and then even less should be information about who you are, called ethos. But for our purposes today, I just want to reinforce with you that when you're giving public speaking in any type, 65%, most of your content should be around stories, the stories you tell. Information supports your stories, but it's the stories that come first. You can tell stories about other people, stories about brands, stories about the company. This is a gentleman who I met and I wrote about in my new book, 5 Stars. His name is Dr. David Feinberg. He's not, you don't know him here, but he was very famous in California. He took hospitals, healthcare companies that were at the bottom of the barrel. They were not doing well. They had terrible patient satisfaction scores. And he brought them to the top. And he brought them to the top through focusing on stories first. So he would have meetings in the morning, and he would bring in real patients to tell stories of their experiences. No one had ever done that before in the hospital. The hospital wasn't doing well because nobody was sharing stories. This man became very successful in the healthcare industry. He took hospitals from the bottom and brought them to the top, and Google just hired him for a brand new healthcare initiative. But he started as a storyteller. And then, of course, there's stories about the company that you may work for. So I won't spend too much time on this because some of you are still in school. But the company that you work for always has a story around it. This is an example of a brand story. I was working for a company called Medtronic that you may not have heard of, but its medical devices are actually in almost every hospital in the world. They're a global company. The company, however, started in a garage in a state called Minnesota. And this gentleman's name was Earl, and he started a company that created medical devices to keep people alive. And this is the story that everybody in the company knows about. Everybody knows about the inventions that he made. Everybody knows about the fact that these life-saving products help children live a longer life than they otherwise would have. Everybody knows about the first products he built and what they are today. And now they have like 300,000 people around the world. But the point is, it's a story that everybody, all 300,000 employees, know. Because stories get circulated. It's stories that bind people together. So we have to tell stories. Now, did you know that every story has a structure? Every movie that you watch, maybe not everyone, but most of the successful movies that you watch have a structure. If they don't have a structure, they're not very good movies. And so public speaking has a structure too. Think about a movie that you've recently watched, and it probably falls under this setup. For the first 30 minutes of a movie, they have to introduce you to the characters of that movie. If you don't know the characters, you won't care about anybody. You won't care about the rest of the movie. Act 2 is what's called the conflict. That's where the characters have to find a villain to conquer. And Act 3 is the resolution, where everybody lives happily ever after. Most movies do fall under that structure. So stories have a structure. All great literature, most great literature falls under that structure. How many of you have heard of the story? It was a huge story in America 2 weeks ago. How many of you have heard of the story of Tiger Woods? Tiger Woods, the golfer. Okay. So Tiger Woods hasn't won a major event for 15 years. It's been 15 years. He won 2 weeks ago, and it was on the front page of every newspaper in America. But they all called it the comeback story. They said it was the greatest comeback story in sports. And if you look at it carefully, it follows a structure. That's why people liked it. Usually it starts with a hero who has a goal. He wanted to be the greatest golfer in the world. But the hero in every movie falls. They stumble. And he had a lot of problems. And he had 4 back surgeries. He couldn't even get up out of bed. It was that bad. But then he comes back and he's transformed. And he not only is transformed as a golfer, he's transformed as a person. So if you read all of the articles about this golfer, you'll see that they all follow this pattern because there's a structure to all stories. So as a public speaker in your life, whether you're in school or when you start your careers and your jobs, always understand that there is a structure to good public speaking. There is a structure to good stories. I want to touch on two other topics that are both also in some of the books that I'll be signing out here. The other is called novelty. Novelty simply means that the brain gets bored really easily. Have you all been bored listening to a class or a lecture? You get bored every once in a while? There's a reason for that. The brain doesn't pay attention to boring things. Now, don't go back to your class and tell your teacher that you're boring. Sometimes it's not the information, it's the way we deliver the information. Our brains are trained to look for something different and new. And that's why what happens is teachers and business people and every public speaker tends to say the same thing in the same tone of voice for an hour, and pretty soon you get really bored. They don't break it up in any way. They don't change it up. Well, that's why I was fascinated with Steve Jobs, because Steve Jobs was one of those people who didn't just deliver information to you. He actually tried to make it exciting and different. And that's why my first book on communication was all about Steve Jobs. So I'm going to show something to you. I'm going to show you a video.
An iPod.
I'm going to show this to you. So Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone. Remember, do many of you use iPhone here, or is it Android or iPhones? Yeah, okay. So when he first introduced the iPhone, it was really interesting because he came out and he said, I have 3 products to introduce today. 3. He said, I'm going to introduce a brand new iPod. I'm going to introduce a phone. And I'm going to introduce a new device that you've never seen before that's going to connect you to the internet. And everybody in the audience was shocked. They didn't. 3? Apple's going to introduce 3 products that I get to use? He had a trick. He had a little twist. Like every good movie has a little twist, a little surprise. Here's how he surprised everybody.
An iPod. A phone. And an internet communicator. An iPod. A phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone.
He made it fun. He's entertaining. He's enjoyable to watch. But above all, he changed it up a little bit. He gave you something unexpected. I want to ask you a question. In your classes, most of you are college or in school, in your classes, when do you start to lose interest in a lecture or a class? How many minutes from beginning to, let's say, 50 minutes? When do you think this happens? Can one of you give me a number? How many minutes do you think this happens? Yes, sir, in the back? 30 minutes? Okay, 30 minutes. It's a little shorter than that.
15 minutes?
How much?
15?
15? What did you say? 10. You're right. It's 10 minutes. Scientists have found that in almost any situation, in business or in a classroom, people tend to tune out after about 10 minutes. And that's why it's very important to great communicators, good speakers, reset. They reset by giving you something a little different. They change it up just a little bit. Maybe they ask a question like I just did. Maybe they show a video like I've done. Maybe they'll tell a story. Maybe they'll have you do something that's hands-on. But the point is that each and every one of us thinks like this. We do tend to get bored really quickly. So as a public speaker, you have to think about, how do I keep people's attention? One good way of keeping people's attention and getting them to remember everything you do is by keeping it short, simple. Did you know that in business, some of the greatest ideas fit on the back of a napkin? Some of the best ideas in business were scribbled on the back of a napkin. Even the napkins that you find in the airports and the airlines, the small ones. I've talked to Richard Branson before. So Richard Branson started Virgin Atlantic and Virgin Australia from the back of a napkin. One of his former partners had an idea for an airline in Australia that would take on the big airline called Qantas. It was just an idea. And he had scribbled it on the back of a little card where, you know, you put your Coca-Cola, your drink, on the small coasters. It was that small, and he scribbled his idea. He showed it to Richard Branson, and Richard Branson said, "That's a good idea." This happens quite a bit. The reason is because
I brought some materials. I want you to tell us what they all have in common.
The reason is because short, concise makes a difference. So how many of you have heard or know of Richard Branson? Okay, a few of you. I'm going to show you a short video of me talking to Richard Branson. He's a billionaire. He's one of the richest people in the world. And he's going to tell you why it's so important that if you have an idea that you want to talk about, it has to be very short and very concise. So concise, you should be able to tell them what your idea is in 30 seconds. Would you like to see why? Let's watch.
I brought some materials. I want you to tell us what they all have in common, and I think you know where I'm going with this. I have a beer coaster. You have the beer coaster.
It looks like you're about to pitch an idea on a beer.
I have a napkin, a cocktail napkin. It has to be a small cocktail napkin, and I have an envelope. So I'll let you finish it. In your book you say, if a pitch cannot do what, you're not interested.
Well, if it cannot fit onto a beer mat, a napkin, or the back of an envelope, then I'd rather listen to somebody else's pitch that can fit on. No, I think that most good ideas can be expressed very quickly. I mean, the old elevator pitch thing, I think it's true. And in my book, I talk about people, you know, seeing me on a bike and coming alongside me and pitching an idea. My son-in-law, for instance, did that, and we ended up starting Virgin Sport as a result.
So I'll leave it there, but the point is that someone can ride up to him on a bicycle and be able to give him their idea in that short amount of time. That's what people are looking for. They're looking for something simple and concise. The reason why you get bored almost all the time when you're listening to other people is because they talk too long. They take a long time to get to the point. And so as a good public speaker, what I do, and I work with a lot of executives and business leaders, is I help them get to the point quickly. So let me give you just a couple of more ideas that'll help you get to the point very, very quickly. And then we'll go sign some books in a few minutes, okay? I'd like to meet as many of you as possible. But let me give you just a couple of ideas that will help you get to the point. In almost anything, any idea that you have, any presentation that you have, the first thing we're going to talk about is the big picture. This is the way our brain wants information. It wants the big picture before the details. So in class, when you have a lecturer in your class or a professor, you want to know why you're in class. You want to know what you're going to learn, then you can learn the details. A very famous neuroscientist told me this story once. He said, Carmine, this is the way our brains evolved. When our ancestors ran into tigers, they did not ask, how many teeth does the tiger have? They asked, will it eat me? Big picture before details. He gave me this example, and this is in the science. If I were to give you a random group of words, and I were to ask you, what do they mean, quickly, you got to work on it a little bit. You have to think about it. Raincoat, sandals. Well, it might have something to do with a travel, maybe. What you would bring on a trip. Sunglasses, but why would you need a raincoat? Can anybody tell me what these words would mean? What's the big picture? What do these words mean? What's the meaning? Let me show you. Rain gear, of course. Now I get it. Umbrella, raincoats, boots. Huh. Now I get it. It's easier for me to understand. Beach gear. Sunglasses, swimsuits, sandals. Now I get it because I see the big picture. So when you're speaking in class, next time you have a presentation in class, always make sure to start with the big picture first. Tell me what you're going to tell me, and then give me the information. Then tell me the details. The meaning always has to come before the details. One way of thinking about your presentation or your next, anything that you want to pitch, if you want to think about the meaning, it's called the log line. This is how Hollywood movies get made. The person who writes the movie will walk into a meeting where there's a producer, and the producer of that movie wants to know the log line. They want to know, what is the movie about? In one sentence, they want to know what the movie is about. They call it the log line. This is a very important concept in public speaking. If you want to be a good public speaker, you have to ask, what is my movie about? This is a real log line. In the 1970s, a film director walked into a producer's meeting and said, I've got an idea for a movie. It's about a police chief with a phobia for open water who battles a gigantic shark with an appetite for swimmers and boat captains. What movie do you think he got made? Jaws, that's right. That's a true story, because he was able to get people excited about the concept. So if you're going to be a public speaker in any way, make sure to get people excited with one sentence. And then, if you really want to keep it short, you can't just give me a sentence, you have to give me a little bit more information. Stick to 3. Give me 3 reasons why I should be excited about your project. Tell me 3 features about your product. If you guys are going into the job world pretty soon, 3 reasons to hire you. Why 3? Why do you think I'm focused on 3? Anybody? What's so important about 3? Who has an answer for me? Why 3? Yes, sir.
It's real quick. 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. It's quick, it's easy, and apparently we know this through science that humans have a capacity for only about 3 or 4 ideas in working in short-term memory. If you give me too much information, I'm going to lose all that information. And that's why this does get back to Aristotle. Famous fairy tales in any culture. We have the 3 Little Pigs, the 3 Musketeers. In any culture, literature and fairy tales and mythology is typically broken up into 3. Aristotle was the first to say that every great story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. 3, people only have a capacity for 3 ideas. That's why Apple is really good at selling products. And they know that they don't want to confuse you. So they try to minimize the choices. When you walk into an Apple store, if you go online, there's 3 types of iPhones. There's 3 types of Apple Watches. There's not 22. It's too confusing. And they do this all the time, even when they explain products. It's all about the power of 3. At Google, they're studying this too. At Google, this gentleman, remember I told you the chief storyteller? The chief storyteller says, if you have 1 hour with somebody, you can talk about 3 opportunities with a company. If you have 1.5 hours, you can talk about 4. And if you have 6 hours, you could talk about 4. Humans only have a capacity for 3 to 4 big ideas. So I'm going to end there because I think I don't want to overload you with information, and I want to make sure that since the brain gets bored easily, I want to end before you get bored. But here's the point. Each and every one of you can build a skill that will set you apart, that will help you be happier and more successful and much more connected to everybody. And that skill is the ability to use your mind and your ideas and your words to persuade another person to back your idea or to get excited about you, whether it's a job, whether it's a career, whether you're an entrepreneur, whatever it is, whether you have a great idea to improve the community or the country, you have to be able to sell your idea. That's why we call it the human edge. Because today, more than ever, your value is here. Your value is in what you believe and your ideas for the future. If you cannot convince other people to get excited about your idea, then we're going to fall behind. And no one at this point has the freedom right now to fall behind because the world is changing so fast and we have so many challenges. So in order to stand out and to be successful and to get your ideas heard, you need to start learning how to be a better public speaker. And every great public speaker who I've ever talked to, who I've ever interviewed for my books, did not start out that way. They started out as people who were very shy or introverted or afraid of getting up in groups. Some of the wealthiest people who I've ever talked to, people who have built big brands, even Richard Branson, were very, very shy about public speaking. But they realized that it was a skill they had to build. And so it is a skill that you can acquire, that you can build, and you absolutely must build if you want to own the future. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I have several books out here I'd love to sign for you. We wanted to end at 12 o'clock. Did you want to take questions, or would you like to do a book signing?
I wanted to ask if anybody has any questions for Carmen. You have a question? Yes?
Can you tell me what schools you're from, too, when you ask a question?
Hi, I'm David Muirhead. I'm with Majid Al Futtaim Properties. I'm not a school.
Okay. You're sitting next to school.
But one of the things about public speaking that
Yeah.
I always find is difficult is people are always saying, and I noticed your whole speech today, you didn't have one
Oh, thanks for counting.
So please
Wow.
tell me how you achieved that.
I understand, and that is a big frustration that everybody has. Those are what are called filler words. Now that you say that, I'll tell you exactly why I didn't have a lot of filler words in this talk today. Because I'm speaking to people who I know English might not be the first language. I slowed it down. When we talk too fast, we feel as though we have to fill in the gaps. We have to fill in the pauses because we're afraid of pausing. Again, that comes with confidence in public speaking. The more confident you are, the more practice you put in, the more competent you become as a public speaker. And the more aware you are of some of those habits that most people do. And that's why I think you can set yourself apart if you practice a lot. Some of you, they asked you about the TED Talks. You've seen the TED Talks? How many of you have watched TED Talks online, the streaming TED Talk? Oh, good, all of you. Many people who give TED Talks have read some of my books, so I get to hear from them, which is very gratifying. Do you know how much they practice? I've heard of people practicing 400 times for some of those TED Talks, 400 times. Now, I don't recommend anybody has to practice 400 times for anything, but you get the idea. By that time, you've minimized all those distractions. So I really think it is confidence in your topic. You've done it so much that you know exactly what you're going to say. When you're kind of winging it and you don't really know what you're going to say or you haven't practiced, then you have to come up with time to fill. One thing that's helped me is I watch myself on video. When you do public speaking, record yourself. Everybody has a phone now. Record yourself. Watch yourself back. You'll pick up those habits that we were just talking about. Are there any other questions before we sign some books? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Babita from Higher Colleges of Technology.
Oh, good.
I have a question about audience awareness. So you mentioned that you come with a story to tell.
Yes.
But it also depends on your audience, what your audience is ready to hear, what background information they have.
Yep.
Has there ever been a time where you've been blindsided and you had to change your story just before you began your talk because of the audience? And how do you anticipate or prepare yourself?
You should know your audience ahead of time. So a lot of that is going to be in your research ahead. You should know what your audience already knows. That's part of the preparation. Who am I speaking to? How much do they know? How much information do they already know? What types of stories will connect with them? I could have given you a lot of different stories that maybe would not have connected with you from my own personal experiences. So even when I visit another country, I'm sensitive and I understand what are some stories that maybe they would all know about. I'm not going to choose companies. I do a lot of work with companies. I'm not going to choose companies that you've never heard of. So even to that extent, you're always thinking about what type of stories do you have to deliver. But I think what's overall very important and something I've been studying for 20 years, and I'm absolutely confident about this today more than ever, is you cannot give any audience just information because they will get bored very easily. You have to combine information with story, real stories of real people. I just finished reading Melinda Gates' book that just came out this week. She says the same thing. She learned a long time ago that she can't change policies. She cannot convince governments to do things about helping alleviate extreme poverty if she just gives people information. She has a lot of information, but if it's not wrapped in real stories of real human beings who suffer, she can't convince you. So it's that combination of stories and information that is very impactful. I think that's even more important.
You have a final question?
Yes, one more question, then I'd love to sign some books and meet you.
You have a final question from a gentleman here, Carmen.
Hello, I'm Jesse from AAESS.
Jesse?
Yeah.
Hi, Jesse.
So, how long does it take you to write your speeches that you do?
How long what?
Does it take you to write your speeches that you do?
The speeches or the books?
Both.
Okay. A book takes about 6 months to write. A book will take about 6 months to write because what am I doing? I'm researching the stories for the book. And presentations should take about 10 hours of practice. If you want to give a good presentation, it could take many, many weeks to create the content around that presentation. But if you want to practice it so that you got it down and you're good at public speaking, I would practice at least 10 hours, especially if it's for a grade. If it's for a grade in your class and you've got a public speech to make, they're usually not very long in class anyway. About 10 hours. 10 hours of practice will get you going. All right, well, thank you, and let's sign some books, and let's meet each other. Thank you.
Carmine, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I ask you one final quick question
Yes,
before you
you
sign?
bet.
If there was one quick fix you could offer everybody here where they have to speak at a wedding or speak in front of a class, what's the quick fix that you would do?
The very quick fix that most people never do is practice. They think they know what they're going to say, and they never say it out loud. Say it out loud by yourself or in front of other people. Practice before you actually give your speech or presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a real honor to have Carmine here. Would you
Nice
give
seeing
him
you
huge
again, too.
thanks? He'll be signing just down here in 2 minutes. Do feel free to go and buy a copy of his book, get him to sign it for you. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of the book fair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.